Everyone, and welcome to the On Point Products Call with Senior Vice President Brian Dixon of Research and Development. You know, obviously he's added a tremendous amount of insight with our products, with the information for us to be able to be the greatest messengers of LifeVantage that we possibly can be. And clearly, Brian, I mean, products are the backbone of what we do. Without the products, we wouldn't even be on this phone call, right? And so what we're trying to do with this phone call, and you and I have collaborated quite a bit, is mainly how do we become better messengers? How do we become more informative? And as we become more informative, our belief level increases, the feeling about what we're doing with regards to our LifeVantage business increases. That obviously drives activity, and therefore more and more people understand or learn about our product line. And the topic that we picked today was NRF1. And I love NRF1 because who doesn't want to have more energy? And it's been fun for me week to week, even though we've started this is our second week, but I've been dissecting, you know, these products even more so than what I've done in the past. And it's a super, super fun opportunity to be able to just get more and more understanding of that. But what's really cool is it's the pathway to power. And who doesn't want more power? And what I've learned, Brian, is that the mitochondria, which powers every single cell in our body, but it also, from the ones that make up our heart, it's the cells that make up our heart, it's the cells that make up our brain, to the ones that actually form our bones and our and also our muscles. And I just never knew a lot of the importance of NRF1 other than, hey, it gives you more energy. And so I am super, super excited to turn this call over to you, my friend, with regards to walking us through the importance of NRF1. How do we become a better messenger of it? And I can't thank you enough for taking time out of every Wednesday for us to do collaborate and fill the minds and the hearts of these amazing people. So Brian, I'll turn it over to you, my friend.
Wow, these people are the people moving and shaking and making things happen. So I'm happy to spend as much time with anybody who's willing to listen and learn. And I wish I would have said this last call, but it's not my goal to turn you all into little scientists. I think Rai said it perfectly, that just to kind of build your faith. And if I bring up science, it's nothing more than to build that faith that these products are science-based. And so again, it's not my goal to turn you into little scientists. I don't think we should be spewing science into people's faces, but it's really just for background information for you all. I think it's unbelievably cool when you kind of get into the weeds and appreciate how everything's working. And by no means am I trying to compare myself to Linus Pauling. But there's a famous quote from him as to why he was such a famous scientist. And his response back was that he was just always curious with the world around him. And that desire to figure out how the world, and especially nature around him, was working was especially strong in him. And that was really kind of his drive, was to unlock all these secrets of nature. And I always had that similar curiosity, and ultimately why I went into molecular and cellular biology, is to be able to understand those things on that molecular level. And it's really cool that these molecules moving around, driven by chemistry or biochemistry, is really what's making everything work. So I'm gonna start with just a little bit of background about the mitochondria, and we're gonna get into some scientific weeds. So follow along, or Rai, you can talk me off the edge if I'm going too far. But again, I want to give you an appreciation, like Rai said, for the mitochondria. They are so unbelievably essential to our overall health and well-being. We literally can't survive without them. So I threw together a couple of slides here. We'll get into some of the nerd stuff. So what are the mitochondria? And this is really interesting, because mitochondria are these little compartments. And when we talk a little bit more about how they're actually working, I think you're going to find it unbelievably fascinating how these things are working. I think if you put the brightest engineering minds to the task, I don't know that they would have come up with a system that's as elegant as how the mitochondria produce energy for our bodies. Maybe you've heard it, maybe you haven't, but the theory on how mitochondria became to be is that at some point in our growing up on the face of this earth, our cells absorbed some bacteria. And so we really started to develop this very tight mutualistic synergy with this bacteria that was living inside of us. And now this early primitive bacteria that was engulfed by our cells has taken on such an intricate life with our own cells. The two now, like the mitochondria and the cell, could not live without each other. And the major reason I say that is the mitochondria has its own DNA sequence, but in that DNA sequence, it also encodes not just genes the mitochondria needs to function, but it also encodes some of these more traditional nuclear or cellular genes that our bodies need. And vice versa, our nuclear genome or DNA also houses genes required for mitochondrial function. So you have to coordinate this gene transcription activity between the mitochondria and the nucleus. But more than that, these mitochondria, these little compartments that are actually making the energy for our bodies, and in return, we're providing the mitochondria with the food stores, if you will, to be able to make that energy for us. So we have this unbelievably tight, mutualistic relationship with mitochondria. So just to illustrate it with some simple cartoons, in fact, the cell loves to compartmentalize as much of the cellular function that's going on as possible. So the mitochondria are just one of a number of what they call organelles, or these little compartments inside of the cell. Maybe some other ones you've heard of, obviously the nucleus that houses all of our genetic material. You have something called the Golgi apparatus that really makes a lot of little tiny cells, if you can think of them that way, that shuttle different components to different areas of the cell as they're needed. You have something called the endoplasmic reticulum that's really important to make certain proteins for our cell. And then you have the mitochondria. And the mitochondria are often shown as these really kind of discrete little organelles inside of the body. But what's so interesting about mitochondria is they're also constantly fusing together and fusing apart. And so one mitochondria might encompass, the entire cell as you get this one big mitochondria that's kind of fused together. What else is interesting is the mitochondria can also migrate. They literally run on little highways inside of the cell so that they can move and migrate to areas where there might be a high energy demand. So think, for example, if the cell is trying to divide, right? So one cell becoming two, that process of replicating or duplicating your DNA so that you can have a copy go into each new cell requires a ton of energy to happen. So you might see the mitochondria drive to encapsulate or engulf the mitochondria so that energy can go right where it's needed. But as we start to drill down and look a little bit more into what's going on with the mitochondria, I promise you we're going to get scientific, and it's going to get more scientific than this. So here, just to orientate you, right, we've got that cell, the cartoon, there you have the mitochondrion. And then if you were to blow it up, and if I were to sum up what the mitochondria is doing, the mitochondria is responsible for metabolizing all of the food that we eat into energy. I mean, how amazing is that? So you can see on the screen, glucose. So our bodies basically convert every fuel source into glucose that then gets converted into this other molecule that's called pyruvate. So it's basically cutting the glucose molecule in half. So from 6 carbons on glucose to 3 in pyruvate. so that it can then diffuse or be, I should say, actively transported into the mitochondria, where it enters something called the citric acid cycle or the Krebs cycle, which is really where we're starting to mine the electrons out of all of the bonds of the food that we've eaten. So imagine if I'm just kind of, maybe I'm breaking little matchsticks. And if you can imagine in your mind's eye, if I break that little matchstick, there might be a little splinter or something that shoots off of there. And that little splinter of breaking the bonds is actually these electrons. And our mitochondria have a way to capture that electron and harness the energy that's inside of that electron to ultimately make, through this process called oxidative phosphorylation, ATP for the cell. So ATP is the goal that we ultimately want to get to, because it is the energy currency for the cell. So just like we're spending dollars and cents at the supermarket, the cell is spending ATP to be able to do work inside of the cell. And to illustrate how important that process is, if we were just laying in our beds every single day doing nothing, our mitochondria would have to produce our body weight in ATP every single day, right? So this ATP is constantly being used up and regenerated, used up and regenerated. And that at a minimum is our body weight worth of ATP. Now, if you're an exerciser and that caloric demand goes up even higher, you can be making somewhere between 2 to 3 times your body weight in ATP. So just if you can imagine how rapid and massive that flux is of energy and ATP that's going through the mitochondria. To illustrate how important that energy making process is, 95% or more of the ATP that we're making every single day inside of our bodies, 95% or more is coming specifically from the mitochondria. So by far, the majority of energy our bodies need and produce comes from the mitochondria. To illustrate that point, if we go and look at some of the most toxic compounds on the face of this earth, they work by inhibiting energy production in the mitochondria. So you've probably heard of something called rotenone. More common, I bet you've heard of cyanide and how incredibly toxic cyanide is. Cyanide works by inhibiting the mitochondria so that it can no longer make energy, and we die incredibly quickly when mitochondrial function isn't in place. Just to go, how am I doing? Is that too scientific, Fry? So let's get even a little bit.
This is incredible. I've learned more in 3 minutes than I have the last 4 years. So thank you.
Right on. So just to hone in just a little bit more about what's going on. So there in the middle, you have the citric acid cycle. And if I haven't said it already, maybe you learned it as the Krebs cycle, whatever. But again, the whole goal of that citric acid cycle is to mine electrons from the food that we eat, okay? That electron ultimately gets attached to, in most cases, a compound called NAD. I think we've all heard of that molecule. So that free electron can go on to NAD, and it enters this process known as the electron transport chain. The electron transport chain's job is to mine the energy that's within that single electron. And it does this through a series of steps. An analogy that I like to make through these different, so you can say 4 complexes of the electron transport chain, is to take just a little bit of energy out of that electron and then send it to the next complex or enzyme in the electron transport chain. So it's like, imagine if you can, just envisioning a huge river, maybe the Mississippi River or the Columbia River in the Pacific Northwest, where you have this massive river that's coming down, and we put a dam in front of that river. That water backs up and we get a height differential between the lake or reservoir that's behind the dam and then where that river is going to start flowing again. So what we're utilizing is the potential energy that's in water, and through gravity and the weight, we're able to turn generators that create electricity for us, right? Not very dissimilar from how the mitochondria are working. Then that water will run down to the next dam and the process repeats, right? So, you know, on the Columbia River, gosh, I don't know if there's 5, 6, 7 dams along that river. And at each stage, you're able to mine just a little bit more of that potential energy out of that water until, of course, it has to flow back to the ocean where the cycle has to repeat. The sun heats up the water gets high up into the mountains, and then runs back down to the ocean. So eventually these electrons lose all of their energy and effectively flow back out to the ocean. And an interesting side note, again, coming back to the mitochondria, have you ever thought about why we have to breathe oxygen, right? If we're oxygen deprived, it also kills us pretty quickly, right? The rule of 3, if you're into survival at all, right? You can only survive 3 to 4 minutes without getting oxygen. And the reason for that is when that final electron has been depleted of all of that potential energy that's in it, we got to get it out of that electron transport chain and out of the way so that that process can keep cycling through. The molecule that the mitochondria attaches that leftover electron to is oxygen. So the reason oxygen is so critical for our life, just like we were talking about those toxins that are so poisonous by inhibiting mitochondrial function, if we stop breathing air, there's nowhere to put that last electron. That system backs up and effectively stops, and you've inhibited mitochondrial function, just like we have with cyanide. So we need oxygen to be able to accept that last electron, and our bodies ultimately detoxify that oxygen molecule with an extra electron ultimately to water. And this is important to bring up because this is also where superoxide dismutase and catalase are going to have their most importance, because superoxide dismutase is taking that oxygen molecule with that extra electron and is ultimately helping detoxify that free radical ultimately to water. So superoxide dismutase works first, and then catalase picks up where it ends, and we end up with good old-fashioned water. Okay, so that's how the mitochondria are working. It's an unbelievably elegant process. Only scratched the surface with how they work, but wanted to give you that little bit of background so that you can appreciate how important they are, the intricacies that are going on inside of the mitochondria. And it's also, I think, an important point to illustrate why the nutrients in Protandim NRF1 Synergizer are so important. So the ingredients in there are specifically serving 2 functions. So I would say, if you were to ask me, you'd have the quercetin and the grape extract that are working on that more traditional nutrigenomic angle to be able to activate this protein called NRF1 and another important protein called PGC1 alpha. Again, the names aren't so important, but what's been shown is that when we can activate NRF1, activate those 2 genes, what we can do is encourage the cell to get rid of the bad mitochondria, the mitochondria that have been damaged through this process, and put new, young, healthy ones in their place. Because what can happen, you're generating these massive quantities of free radicals and oxidants inside of the mitochondria, and if they're not mopped up quickly by SOD and catalase, those free radicals and oxidants are going to work to further damage the mitochondria. And what has very clearly been shown in the scientific literature is that once those mitochondria begin to get damaged, they lose the efficiency. It generates more free radicals and more oxidants that go on to further damage the mitochondria, and you get this vicious downward spiral. So the goal of Protandim NRF1 Synergizer is to keep those mitochondria as young and as healthy as possible so that we can maximize the energy production inside of our cells, and then also providing other nutrients like acetyl L-carnitine, lipoic acid, and coenzyme Q10 that's also absolutely required for all of this process that you see on the screen to work. And so let's talk about those three nutrients individually. Carnitine is absolutely essential to be able to get fat into the mitochondria so that it can be metabolized. Okay, so all of this fatty acid metabolism, right, to get energy from fats is happening inside of the mitochondria. And it takes adhering carnitine to that fat to be able to shuttle it in to the mitochondria so that we can burn it. So no carnitine, we're not getting any fat into the mitochondria. Lipoic acid is very critical in the breaking of those bonds inside of that citric acid cycle. So without alpha lipoic acid, that citric acid cycle is going to come to a screaming halt, and our mitochondria are not able to produce energy. And then the last one is coenzyme Q10. So I don't know if you can see my cursor here, but there's a little green circle there with a Q in it, and that represents coenzyme Q10. So rather than water rushing down a river, here we have coenzyme Q10 that's working as the shuttle to get the electrons through the various complexes of the electron transport chain so that we can ultimately make that energy. So three very critical nutrients for that mitochondrial biochemistry to occur, and then that quercetin and grape extract to help with that activation or nutrigenomic front to activate that mitochondrial turnover. So, Rye, that's just a little bit of background about the mitochondria, why they're so important, and how the nutrients in Protandim NRF1 Synergizer can help support it.
Man, that's incredible, Brian. One of the questions that I have is what happens, like for a person that's not taking NRF1, how are they getting this? Like what is the normal average person that has no clue about supplementation or is consuming it? Like, how does a person build NRF1? And the second, kind of question to that is, are we activating our own body's ability to create NRF1, or are we actually consuming NRF1 with regards to the products that we're taking at LifeVantage?
Yeah, it's a great question, Rye. NRF1, the protein, is working very similarly to NRF2. And that is, the protein is just made by the cell and it gets anchored to a specific part of that cell. And when the right stimulus comes along, it will activate that NRF1 protein. NRF1 goes into the nucleus and flips the switches on, again, scientists, just to make everything as complicated as possible, activating another different protein, also called NRF1, and this other protein called PGC1 alpha, that is ultimately responsible for that mitochondrial turnover. So that process is inherent and incorporated into our bodies, but very clearly that process doesn't work as efficiently as we age. And I hesitate to say that aging word, because we're talking about this stuff starting to happen in your 20s and definitely by your 30s. And so with the decline of those proteins activities, we also know that the mitochondria inside of our bodies are also aging, just like other components of our cell. And so the goal is to try to activate those proteins, keep that natural process working so that we're removing those old and damaged mitochondria and putting back the young, healthy ones. What's interesting about the three other nutrients, the carnitine, the lipoic acid, and the Q10, is those aren't considered essential nutrients. But what has very clearly been shown in the scientific literature is that those nutrients also decline as we age. So our ability to make those nutrients naturally is also declining. And so you can see you have this double-edged sword if you don't intervene and do something, where these mitochondria are going to continue to be damaged. They're going to continue to be compromised. And you're also not able to produce as much energy because you're missing those other three critical components to mitochondrial function. And so overall mitochondrial activity declines. And in fact, it's been hypothesized that as we age, somewhere between 1 to 2% of all the oxygen we breathe is converted to free radicals and other oxidants. So it's just this continually progressing issue over the course of our entire lifespan.
That's incredible. A lot of people have asked me, Brian, you know, if you were to take one, NRF1 or NRF2, you know, what would you do? Or a better question would be, how do they work together to give us our optimal health? Like, what is NRF1 playing off of NRF2 or vice versa as we consume this product?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And, you know, of course you can take the products individually. I personally have a hard time rectifying that situation in my head, because I assume those of us that are worried about oxidative stress and worried about all the underlying conditions that oxidative stress can lead to, it's of the utmost importance. And then you throw the mitochondria into the mix. The mitochondria are the #1 source of free radicals and oxidants that's originating from our bodies internally, just as a byproduct of metabolism and physiology. So yeah, of course, if someone's mostly concerned about, let's say, energy production, yeah, they can take Protandim NRF1 Synergizer alone. If you're only worried about that antioxidant defense and detoxification defense, yes, absolutely, you can take Protandim NRF2 Synergizer on its own. But there are a number of synergies and reasons why you would want to take both of those products together. So the first would be, remember how I mentioned there's some mitochondrial genes that live inside of our nucleus, and there's some of those nuclear genes that live inside of the mitochondria. So the cell has this huge problem it has to overcome, where it has to synchronize the genes being made inside of the nucleus of the cell and the genes being made inside of the mitochondria. And the major mechanism by which that coordination happens is through the proteins NRF1 and NRF2 specifically. So that's going to help coordinate the functions of those two different compartments inside of the cell. But if we also start talking about making more mitochondria, potentially producing more free radicals and oxidants, I think we want to have Protandim NRF2 Synergizer there to help increase that expression of superoxide dismutase, or SOD, or catalase, to further help as that insurance policy to try to minimize as much as we can that damage that's going to be occurring in the mitochondria. And I think most of you have heard, but last year we ended up filing 4 patents around the Tri-Synergizer. But we also did some studies where we just looked at the combination of Protandim NRF1 Synergizer and Protandim NRF2 Synergizer. And even with just those 2 products alone, not the full Tri-Synergizer, we were able to see synergistic effects between both those NRF1 genes and the NRF2 genes. So a lot of rationales to utilize the 2 products together.
That's incredible. I know, looking at our label information, Brian, you know, it recommends 2 capsules. You know, is that better taken in the morning when we're starting our day? Is it better to be taken at dinner when the body's actually repairing itself? And the other, addition to that is, if we wanted to consume more, would the body be able to absorb it and use it? Or is it a lot like vitamin C, where it'll only use up to a certain amount, and then we're wasting the excess? What does that look like?
Yeah, it is. Everything works up to some maximal activity. I mean, everything in biology falls on a bell curve where too little of something is a problem and too much of something is a problem. So we always want to be looking for that sweet spot. And we can't even talk about this for things that we would never think could be harmful to us. I mean, things like water. If we drink too much water, we get too hydrated, that can have massive consequences to cellular physiology and how we're working. And of course, not drinking any water leads to dehydration and a whole nother set of problems. So nutrients work in this same way, and it's what we call that therapeutic window. And for all the ingredients that are found in Protandim NRF1 Synergizer, there's going to be a pretty massive therapeutic window for those ingredients. And the simple fact that most of those nutrients, right, especially the lipoic acid and coenzyme Q10, they're working by handling electrons, right? And so by definition, if they can receive an electron and give it away, they can also be acting as antioxidants as well. So there's a cool little regulatory step in there where if we give the cell extra coenzyme Q10 or we give the cell extra lipoic acid, the first place it's going to put those nutrients is where it needs it, inside of the mitochondria. But because they also have antioxidant properties, extra coenzyme Q10 can embed inside of membranes and be a great antioxidant to help protect the fatty components of our cells. Something similar is happening with lipoic acid. And so it's going to also become a very potent antioxidant, and especially in places where we need it, like inside of the mitochondria. So yes, at some level, you're going to not make the best of those nutrients. But again, there's a huge therapeutic window there and really little downside when it comes to any sort of toxicities or any type of concerns from taking too much of those nutrients.
Right. So happy cells are healthy cells, essentially.
Yeah. Is that happy cells, SALES or CELL?
Both, depending on how you're looking at it and where you're coming from. For me, it's almost the same question as what's more important, NRF2 or NRF1, right? Cells, right. SALES or CELLS. But it's interesting for me, Brian, is when you look at kind of the different things that we have on our labels. Now let's just look at our labels, right? We have that BSCG, which is the banned substance certified group. Why is that so important? Like how? Obviously we know it's kind of a high standard certification, but what is it actually doing with our NRF1, our NRF2, and the importance of that certification? Or is it just more, hey, we're doing all the things we need to do as a company to make sure the best products are being, produced and put out there?
Yeah, one is just a good check and balance, and having that third-party validation that our products are just absolutely clean. I've seen it in a previous life where banned substances, however accidentally, end up in products. And so we just want our products to be as clean as possible. The other reason I think it's really important is, we do have a number of athletes that are taking our products. And athletes, I say athletes in the realm of athletes that are using athletics as a career. I also am talking about athletes who might just have to rely heavily on fitness to be able to carry out their job. So our police officers, our firefighters, our military personnel, right? People who have to call on the physical strains of exercise and work to be able to conduct their everyday lives. So we wanted to make sure, again, that our products are clean. You can be a professional, elite, Olympic level athlete, take these products and not be concerned. And I think the secret's getting out that supporting your mitochondrial health is also supporting your athletic health, or whatever your athletic endeavors might be in life. So we think it's an important checks and balance. And I do get the question quite a bit, why did we choose BSCG? I mean, there's a number of different organizations out there that you can have your products certified and tested. But the reason we went with BSCG is a couple of reasons. BSCG, the parent company of BSCG, is the one that actually initiated banned substance testing inside of professional sports or Olympic sports. And so we figured who better positioned than to be able to talk to banned substances than the company that actually has come up with all of the testing protocols for banned substances. The other reason we've gone with BSCG is it has a much larger international reach. So a lot of different organizations accept BSCG, especially internationally. In fact, for these last Tokyo Summer Olympic Games, BSCG was the official banned substance testing facility for the Tokyo Olympics.
Wow,
and
I had no idea.
And why we've chosen to go with BSCG.
That's incredible. I had no idea. One of the last questions, and we'll let you get on your day, Brian, would be: are there any other competitors in our space that are focused on NRF1 that you know of?
Yeah, there's absolutely no one that I know of out there that's incorporating, especially the nutrigenomic angle, to activating NRF1 for that mitochondrial turnover aspect that we were talking about. So again, LifeVantage is a pioneer in the space.
That's incredible. If you don't mind, will you just stop sharing your screen? I wanted to just walk our guests through something that I really want to challenge this group on and really start using, because I think there's so much information that the company has provided for us to be able to use at our fingertips. And I'm just going to share my screen. And for anyone that is using this, great, keep using it, keep teaching your distributors with regards to what that looks like. But if you go into, this is just going to this is my replicated site, right? But if you went to LifeVantage and you clicked on products, any product that you guys click on, everything comes up for us to be able to know and have certain information. There will always be videos attached to that specific product. So if you're not using that, not only for yourself to increase that belief and that understanding and understanding how you can gain a testimony of the product beyond just taking it, that's the number one way of gaining a testimony. But also my testimony increases by knowledge and information that we've heard on this phone call. If you continue to scroll down, it'll always show you the different halal certified, obviously gluten-free, dairy-free, vegan-free, a brief description of what the actual product is, all of the different benefits, and then it'll continue to transition down to the usage. Here's what Brian was talking about, the 5 main ingredients of NRF1 and the importance of them and how they work. Here's the label info for anybody as far as the consumption and how to use the product properly. And this is what I love the most. It'll show all the different certifications on that specific product. Now, if there's patents also available on that product, the patents will be there as well. So this is what I wanted to show everyone to make sure you're taking advantage of. I love these blog posts. These are different things that allow us to be able to just kind of increase or have certain things at our fingertips. If I click this, it's going to take me into a lot of different information that's specific to mitochondria, the theory of aging, and NRF1 pathway. I mean, it's just all here, guys, that we get to use that allow us to become what? The best messengers of LifeVantage, to be able to tell the story, to be able to lay down a foundation, to create the expectation for people. And I love what my upline says, Tyler Daniels, is we get to tell the story and assist people of not knowing to knowing, and why they need LifeVantage, why they need NRF2, why do they need NRF1. We get to be that blessing for them with more of an intellectual property, meaning an intellectual distribution of information of these different products. And so this is just showing you the power and also all of the information that's available at each of our fingertips. If you click here as well, you guys can go into a lot of the product sheets, and then you can go into the frequently asked questions. What are a lot of the frequently asked questions specific to that product? And I would just challenge anyone that is really trying to get their business going in the right direction, to gain momentum in their belief, to get their feelings, in creating more activity by filtering this information. What are we doing? We're just a conduit of information. So the bigger conduit of information that I am as a distributor, then I have more information flowing through that conduit to a customer or a distributor that ultimately says what? I'm ready to make a decision. I would like to order NRF1 or NRF2 or the Vitality Stack or whatever our products are. And so guys, please, please take advantage of all of the information that you have at your disposal. Brian, you've been an incredible inspiration to us today. Thank you for the knowledge that you've landed and dropped on our plates. We're super excited. Everyone's going to gain momentum. You're going to see this call, guys, and it should, if we're doing this correctly on our side. Brian will always deliver with regards to a layman's way of understanding the nerd science of our products so that we can speak about it. It's what I love most about Brian. I've heard other scientists, I've heard other people that have come in and tried to take over our research and our development and our product, and they're talking Chinese. It's just going over my head. And what it does is it forces us to kind of become our own scientist. And what we don't want to do is we do not want to be in the mindset, especially as distributors, of what? Analysis paralysis, meaning we're learning, we're becoming a scientist. That does not mean we're growing our business. And so the analysis paralysis responsibility is put on the shoulders of Brian. We get to plug in brand new people, customers, distributors that might not be, brought up to speed, new distributors that are learning this for the first time. That is what this call is for. And the number of people on this phone call should be in the thousands. That's the goal of it. And we'll continue to be consistent with Dr. Dixon with regards to this call on Wednesday. And I will continue to work with him on nailing down a specific time. But for right now, just work with us based on his schedule, our schedule, and we'll kind of be out in front of that week to week until we can nail something down. But guys, keep changing the world. Dr. Dixon, thanks for doing what you're doing. Continue to give us all of that information. It's a beautiful gift that you're giving us every single Wednesday, and it's deserved and it's needed in this company right now.
I appreciate that, Rye. Really, thank you for the kind words.
Absolutely. So guys, go keep changing the world. We'll let you go, Brian. And thanks, guys. And also, real quick, Greg, will you put the link of the YouTube channel? These are recorded. These are going into the YouTube channel for anybody to have access and go back to. Now, we know it's a 1 o'clock call today, but that doesn't mean that you can't send that link out and your people or anyone who finds this stuff interesting can dissect that. They can go into it anytime they want during the day. And so make sure that link's up and make sure you subscribe. So we'll go from there. But cheers, everyone. And thank you for being you. And thank you for choosing you. And thank you for choosing LifeVantage. We'll talk to you guys soon.